designated for a specific sin. It could be that it needs to be for a specific sin. It's funny they didn't think of that. Okay, Shmuel Kerebi Sviralai. The Gemara answer is easy. Shmuel holds like Rabbi. What did Rabbi say? That this gets put to death. So this one here, the carbon taida, doesn't need bread. Good answer. It didn't want to say that originally. The Amar Avuda b'shas afrasha mesa. Avuda b'shas afrasha mesa. That if it was lost at the time that I designated the second one, then when I find it, it has to be put to death. Okay, the Gemara has a problem here though, because according to Rabbi, there's never a case of sending it to a pasture. That was the difference between Rabbi and the Chachamim. The Chachamim said it depends when you found it. Sometimes you let it pasture. Some cases you put it to death. According to Rabbi, it's always put to death. Now Shmuel in his din, he said that it depends on what happens by a chatas. If it's put to death, then there's no bread. And if it pastures, then there is bread. That means I need a case by a chatas where it goes into pasture till it gets a mum. According to Rabbi, I don't have a case when it goes into pasture. It's always put to death. So Shmuel cannot hold like Rabbi because he's using an example that doesn't exist with Rabbi. There is no pasture case. But how do we have a case of pasture by Rabbi? Rabbi says that in every case you always put it to death, the second animal. Gemara answers Rabbi Shia says no. There is a case. Rabbi Shia says that if at the very beginning, it's not that he lost the animal. Before he starts, he does a sin. He only needs to designate one. But he's the type of guy, he says, just in case it gets lost, I'm going to designate two. So he designates two. So the second one was designated while the first one was there. Rebbe says it gets put to death if it wasn't there when you designated the second one. But here you have both there. So Rabbi, this is a case that Rabbi Shia says, according to Rebbe, that that the second one goes into pasture. So in that case where the second one would go into pasture, in that case, the carbon taida would require bread. If it would be a carbon taida, if someone designates two taidas. And v'hagabi taida ki agavna ain't tuna lechem. The problem is that if someone would designate one taida and a second taida right away, we designate the two of them. One of them he needs to bring. The other one is just in case. The second one does not require bread. It's just extra money. We said that before. That extra money, the leftover money, doesn't require bread. So we said that Shmuel's going to hold like Rebbe, and then we found the case where Rebbe actually holds that it goes into pasture, but the halacha is not going to be like that in Shmuel's corresponding case. Rather, Shmuel holds like Reb Shimon. The Amar, Reb Shimon says, Chomish chatayis meses. There's 5 types of chatas that get put to death. The 5 are all because the chatas isn't necessary. This carbon chatas is not necessary to be brought. The 5 are if the chatas has a child, so it's not necessary to bring. It has the holiness of a chatas, but there's no one to bring it. If someone exchanges the chatas for another one, he says, "I'm going to bring this animal instead of that animal." So you can't bring the second one. Usually by other karbanos you bring both, by a chatas not. A chatas that the owner died, so there's no sin that he needs to bring it for because he was atoned. Or the owner brought a different carbon. Somehow he has an extra one, and he brought one first. So the second one dies. So according to Reb Shimon, you don't have the case of Raya. So what are we saying over here? That we're saying here, we had a problem. We said that that Shmuel holds like Rabbi, and therefore you don't bring bread with the second taida. Fits with the din. You don't bring bread with the second taida. You only bring bread with one. We said, yeah, but Rabbi doesn't have a case of sending it to pasture. I don't know my watch here. So what time is it over there?
6 o'clock.
Okay. So I don't have a case where you send. We said no. You do have a case where you send it to pasture. The what's the case? If you designate two originally. So we said, yeah, but if you designate two originally, then you don't have to bring a corresponding case by a taida. You don't bring bread with it. So Shmuel can't hold like Rabbi. So we said no. Shmuel holds like Reb Shimon, where Reb Shimon would say that the animal gets put to death. Okay, so now by a taida I don't bring bread with that fits with the halacha. The problem is v'harayil Reb Shimon Leslie klal. But Reb Shimon has no case of putting it to pasture. And one of Shmuel's halachas was, it depends. If a chatas would be put to death, then the halacha would be one way. If it's put to pasture, it would be another way. But if Shmuel holds like Reb Shimon, there is no pasture. The Gemara answers, not such a satisfying answer, but it's the answer. Shmuel nami chada kamar. Shmuel only said one of these things. He didn't say both statements. The second statement that we attributed to Shmuel was implied from what he said, but that's actually not accurate. All he said was kol shebechatas mesa b'toida into Menachem. If it would be put to death, I don't have to bring bread with it. If it would be a taida, if it would be a chatas and put to death, by a taida I don't bring bread with it. What about that whole thing about pasture? No, that we just implied, thinking that there was such a case, but there actually is no case, and Shmuel never said that. So my kamash balon. What is the chiddush of Shmuel? It's nice and confusing, but what's his chiddush? It says lafukim mid Rabbi Yochanan. What he's actually saying is he's actually arguing with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, they live in the same time. Rabbi Yochanan lives in Tveria. Shmuel lives in Nardai. Shmuel lived in Nardai. Rabbi Yochanan was fond of Shmuel. He wanted to go see him. The Gemara tells us that he went out. He was going to go visit Shmuel. He was going to travel to Bavel. He asked the child, "Psykli psukcha, tell me what you learned today in yeshiva." And the boy was learning Shmuel, the book of Shmuel. It's a different Shmuel. It's Shmuel Hanavi. It's 1,000 years later. He says, what I learned today in yeshiva was Shmuel Mace. That Shmuel died, which is towards the beginning of the book of Shmuel. Shmuel dies. Remember when Shaul, by the war, you remember Shmuel dies? Remember Shmuel dies and Shaul needs him and all of that. Like it says over there, Shmuel dies. So he says, I missed it. I'm not going to go. Then the Gemara says, actually, Shmuel didn't really die. But the Eibishter didn't want him to have to travel, so it said, they had the boy say, he didn't want him to be matriach to travel. Okay. We'll learn it in the next Masechta in Chulin. Over there, there's a whole thing about are you allowed to use psukim it's like divination, are you allowed to open a sefer to get an answer, so it discusses that. So he's arguing with Rabbi Yochanan. The Amar Adam Eskaper B'Shvach Hekdesh. Rabbi Yochanan says that a person can use the offspring of a sacrifice. The offspring of his taida, if he brings it first, he brings the bread along with it. Shmuel says that, let's say that would have been a chatas. The offspring of a chatas gets put to death. I don't bring bread with it. So there's a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel. That's what we learned this whole page, is if a korban taida has a child, do you ever bring bread with that taida, even if you bring that offspring first? Rabbi Yochanan says yes. If you bring that first, that's the one that gets the bread. And Shmuel says no. The child does not get the offspring, does not get the bread. You will offer it as a sacrifice, but not. It doesn't get the bread. It's not the real sacrifice. Kamashmon Delay Shmuel says that it doesn't get the bread. Amar Rabbi. Rabbi says Zu taida v'zu lachma. If someone says, this is the taida, and this is its bread, okay. So avad alechem. Let's say he loses the bread. So maybe lechem acher. It's not, you bring other bread to replace it. Of the taida, but let's say he loses the taida. Any maybe taida acher, so you don't bring other taida to match it up with this bread. My taima. What's the reason for that? So Rabbi says that lechem leglal. What's the Bais over there? Glal taida. Lechem is drawn along with the taida. It's like secondary to the taida. Vein taida leglal lechem, but you don't draw along the taida just for the bread. So therefore, if the taida gets lost, then you would have to bring another set. It's actually, what it means is that he said zu taida. What it means is a little different. What it means is that just because he has bread here, he wasn't accepting it on himself. Just because he has bread, that doesn't mean that he needs to bring a carbon taida. He said, this is a taida. So if he loses it, he doesn't have to bring a replacement. If he loses the bread, so he has to bring the carbon taida that he still has. So it requires him to replace the bread. But if he loses the animal, so then he doesn't need to replace that animal because he only said Harei Zu. It's a difference between Harei Zu and Harei Eily. You follow?
So the bread's more important than an animal now, in a way.
Well, the bread won't require him to replace the animal. The bread is, in one hand, is less significant. Because when he says, this is the bread, he doesn't have to bring an animal. But if he says, this is the animal, he has to bring bread.
I look at the other way.
Okay, Va'amar Rava. Rava says another case. Hifrish ma'is l'taidasei. Someone designates money for his carbon taida. V'ni taisru. And he has leftover money. Maybe bem lechem. You're allowed to bring the bread with that extra money. L'lachmi taida. Oh, if he designates money for the bread, v'ni taisru, and then he has extra money from the bread, ein maybe bem taida, but that doesn't. You don't bring the taida with that. My taima. What's the reason for this? We base it on the psukim. Eily, if you say mishum de Rav Kana because of a statement of Rav Kana, Rav Kana says minayin l'lachmi taida shenikru taida. How do we know that the breads of the taida are called the taida? We're on 80b. How do we know that the breads of the taida are called the taida? And what's that going to help me if the breads of the taida are called the taida? Because when the person designates money to bring a carbon taida, so the breads are called the taida. We can bring breads with that money. Shenemar v'hikr v'al zevach ha'taida chalis matis. Because it says he brings with the taida sacrifice the breads, and the Gemara understands that the breads are called the taida. Ihachi. But if that's the case, ibchanami. It should be the opposite. If the breads are called the taida, so if you designate money for the breads, you should be able to use that money to bring a carbon taida. The Gemara says, no. Lechem ikri taida. The bread is called a taida, but taida le ikri lechem. But the taida is not called bread. He didn't say he's bringing money for taida, meaning bread, which he could have done. He said, I'm bringing money for the bread. That's not a taida. If he says I'm bringing money for the taida, so the bread is called the taida, you can do that. But if he says I'm bringing money for bread, the animal is not called bread. Ve'amar Rava. Rava has another case. So this is an incredible piece. Hifrish teidasei. Someone designates a carbon taida. Talking about it's an obligation. So if it gets lost, he needs to replace it. V'avda. And it got lost. So he replaced it. It happens. V'avda. Now it's already a problem. He lost the replacement. So he replaced it a second time. Now he has 3. Now he has 3 sacrifices. He has all three standing in front of him. So Niskaper Berishayna, if he uses the first one as his sacrifice, the original one. So Shniya Eina Tunalechem. The rule is that the second one does not require bread, like we learned in the Bais, that you only bring bread with the first one. Shlishis Tunalechem. The third one goes back and requires bread. Why is this? The explanation is because the second one is a replacement for the first one. And the first one you brought with bread. But the third one is a replacement for the second one. And the second one didn't have bread. So you have to bring the bread with the third one.
I think the second one didn't require bread. According to that logic.
Yeah, that's Abaya's opinion. We'll see. Rabbi doesn't hold like that. Rabbi holds that it becomes like it has its own relationship with the third one. You're viewing it all as in one circle. The second one doesn't require, and the third one is a replacement. Rabbi views it like it's like it has its own relationship with the third one, and the Niskapi b'shlishis. Let's say he offered the third one first. So shniya eina tuna lechem. The second one doesn't require bread. However, rishayna tuna lechem. The first one is going to require bread because the first one is not a replacement for the third one. The first one is a replacement for the second one, which didn't have bread. Let's say he does it b'emtzais. He brings the middle one, and he brings bread with the middle one. The second one, the first replacement. So shtei mein tunas lechem. They both don't require bread. Why? Because they're both replacements for the middle one, and the middle one already had bread. You get it? It's clear. Here he has 3. 1, 2, 3. If he brings this one first, so he brings bread with it. He does not bring bread with this because this is replacing this. When he brings his third one, he has to bring bread because this one didn't have bread. So this is replacing this. He has to bring bread with this one. The 40 loaves of bread. Let's see the opposite. Let's say he brings this one first. So he doesn't bring bread with this one because this is a replacement for this. So he doesn't bring bread. But on the first one, it's replacing this, which didn't have bread. He has to bring bread with this. But let's say he does the middle one.
Top has to have bread and bottom has to.
Let's say he brings the middle one. He doesn't and he brings it with bread. He brings it first. So then, when he brings this and this, he doesn't need to bring bread with it because these are both a replacement.
How
for
could
the
you
middle.
bring the middle one? Why would you need a third?
Well, what happened was he lost the first one, so he designated a second one. He lost the second one. He designated a third one. Now, whichever one each one is a replacement for the other one. So
if
now
he had all three of them.
now he has all three.
Why did he take the middle one? Shouldn't
So
he take the third one?
He's able to bring whichever one he wants.
Of the three.
Yeah, of the three. So we're saying that if
How does that make sense?
Oh, because we said imal toida that he could. The Brisa learned out that ezemem sheyirtze yakriv. He can bring anyone he wants first. Whichever one he brings first is going to require the bread. The interesting thing that Rabbi says is that the replacement is also going to require bread. Abaya Amar, like you said it.
In full disclosure, it's 6:28.
Oh. Do I have another 4 minutes?
Okay,
so let me finish.
They don't start till.
Let me finish till
40.
a place where we won't have to start the whole thing tomorrow. Abaya says. I feel in the skaper ba'achas me'em shtei mein tunas lechem, which anyone that you do will make the other ones not require bread. Doesn't matter the order. Kula chalip and dadadin, and they're all in exchange for each other. So even though it's an exchange for an exchange, but that means they're all a replacement for the first one, ultimately. Taisvus has this beautiful thing where he brings other cases where Abaya says exactly the same thing, where Abaya holds that they're all considered one thing, where Rabbi divides them up into separate things. If you do an essay on Abaya and Rava, this is a very good source for the difference in opinion. Amar Reb Zera says, "V'chein le'nin chatas." The same thing would apply to a chatas. Bifresh chatas seva avda. Let's say a person separates he designates a chatas and it gets lost. Bifresh acher stafta, so he designates another one. V'avda, and that also gets lost. V'tacheres tachteh, and that also gets lost. V'nimtzu harishaynes.
Definitely got issues.
Huh?
It's definitely got issues.
He has what's it called? Executive functioning disorder. So they can't find his keys or the replacement. V'nimtzu harishaynes. He finds the first ones. Now he has all three. Niskaper b'rishayna. If he brings the first one, so shniya tamas. The second one that was a replacement for it is put to death. However, shlishis tira. The third one was a replacement for the second one, so you put it to pasture because it's not an exchange for the first one that was brought. Niskaper b'shlishis. If he brings the third one, so shniya tamas. V'rishayna tira, and then the first one exactly the same, like we said. The first one is put to pasture. Niskaper b'emtzah shteim yemusa. They both of them die. Abaya says no. Afila b'skaper b'achzim shteim yemusa. Kula chalipin da'adadin. You know they're all a exchange for the first one. My v'chein. Why do we have to have a second case? So the Gemara explains. If it's the same thing by a taida, so why did Reb Zera have to come along and say this? Mao the tema hasamu dikla meimer marba b'taida. So over there we could have said a little different. We could have said that why does Rava say this? Because a person can bring another taida. So you can bring another taida, you can bring another bread. You have that added factor there. But over here you can't bring an extra chata, so it should always be put to death. A malay, we would say that it's different. That Rava would not say this din, that the third one is put to pasture. Kamash Malan comes to tell us that the same halacha applies. In other words, there's a chiddush in the second case. Okay, let's leave it there.
You answered me. You said that at Krivenu, so